This is assignment 25. And in this assignment, we're going to talk about what happens when the third term is negative. Okay, and this is a big one. Okay, here's what I mean. Something like this. Notice the 1, 2, 3. The third term is negative, or could be like this, where the second and the third term is negative. But what's really important about right now is that we observe that this third term is negative because it changes something. Because here's the thing. Here's what's still true. We still have to multiply. Sorry, let's start with this. We still have to add to the second term and multiply to the third term. So we still are looking for two numbers, in this case that add to 2 and multiply to negative 35. That add to negative 3 and multiply to negative 40. Okay, that's still true. So what does that mean? That means that when I'm looking for my two numbers right now, the two numbers must multiply to a negative. Okay, so this is the first time we're seeing this, right? If I'm talking about everything that I show you on this page is the third term is going to be negative. And so since I'm always looking for two numbers that multiply to the third term, then I'm looking now for two numbers that multiply to a negative. What kind of numbers multiply to a negative? The only way that we get a negative number when we multiply is if we have one negative and one positive. So this time, rather than getting, right, when we first started talking about this, we had all positives and both my numbers were positive, right? I would get like positive 4 and positive 5. Then we said, oh, what if the two numbers multiply to be positive and add to be negative? Well, then I have two negative numbers, okay? So this is different. Now there's going to be one positive and one negative. Now, here's what makes this a little bit more challenging. Because we were always looking for two numbers that multiply to this and add to this. Okay, but here's the thing. When I add a positive and a negative, because now I'm going to have one positive number and one negative. So what happens when I add a positive and a negative? Let's just take a look. Let's just do a couple problems so we can just observe. Like, let's say I do 3 plus negative 5. What does that equal? That's positive 3, right? There's 3 positives, and there's 5 negatives. So what happens? This cancels, this cancels, this cancels. I'm left with negative 2, right? What if I do negative 7 plus 2? Well, that would be, there'd be 7 negatives, and then 2 positives would cancel them out, and I'd be left with negative 5. What about if I had negative 5 plus 8? Well, in this case, there'd be 5 negatives and 8 positives. So the 5 negatives and 5 of the positives would cancel out, but I'd be left with 3 positives. Or what if I had something like this, 10 plus negative 4? And have 10 positives, and then this is the same as 10 minus 4, right? This is 6. Okay, so here is what I observe when I combine a positive and a negative. When I add a positive and a negative, here's what I observe. You actually end up subtracting the numbers, right? Like 5 minus 3 is 2, 7 minus 2 is 5, 8 minus 5 is 3, 10 minus 4 is 6. So you actually subtract the numbers. And here's the thing, is you keep the sign of the larger number, right? Like for example, here I got negative 5 because there were 7 negatives and 2 positives. So when 2 negatives and 2 positives canceled out, I was left over with negatives. So the sign of the answer, the sum, is always going to be whatever the larger number was, right? Like here the larger number was 5, it was negative, so the answer is negative. Here the larger number was 7, it was negative, so the answer was negative. Here the larger number was positive, here the larger number was positive, so the answers were positive. So, okay, so subtract and keep the sign of the larger number. Okay, so this is not new information. We know this. We've done this. Okay, so now let's practice a couple problems. And I'm going to show you the example problem and what my work looks like on paper. And I'm also going to write down my thought process. And I know it's going to feel like a little bit long, but I think it's going to be really helpful for you to be able to come back to that thought process because it's hard to capture that in notes, right? Okay, so if I see a problem like this, the first thing I think, right, here's my thought process. And this is the same thought process that you're going to go through when you see a problem like this. You're going to think, okay, I need two numbers. Okay, and what you notice right away is that 35 is negative, right? So you know that the two numbers are going to multiply to 35. And because you notice that this 35 is negative, you know one of the numbers that you think of is going to be positive and one's going to be negative. So that when you go to add them, you're actually going to end up subtracting them. So right now you need two numbers that multiply to 35 and subtract to 2. So right now I don't care about what the sign of this 2 is. That's not the first thought that comes into my head. My first thought is I need two numbers, they multiply to 35 and subtract to 2. So I think, okay, what multiplies to 35? Well, I only have two choices, right? It's 1 and 35 or 7 and 5. So 1 and 35 subtract to 34. So my two numbers are 7 and 5. Okay, so that's my first thought. Now, I have this second thought after I figure out these two numbers. So first I thought, okay, I need two numbers that multiply to 35 and that subtract to 2 because the 35 is negative. Now I need to decide, basically, I know one of these is going to be positive and one of them is going to be negative. So I need to decide now which one is which. Okay, now what I notice is that this 2 is positive. So I'm thinking to myself, I need the larger number to be positive. Why? Because I want, when I add them, I want the result to be positive. So my result is, okay, which one's larger? 7 is larger. So my two numbers are positive 7 and negative 5. Okay, and that leads me to my answer. So I'm going to have x minus 5 and x plus 7. It doesn't matter the order. I could have written x plus 7 and then x minus 5. Okay, so notice my thought process, right? First I come up with the two numbers and then I decide about the signs. That was my thought process. Let me show you another one. I'll write down my thought process again. Okay, the first thing I notice is that this 40 is negative. So right away I think, okay, here's what I need. I need two numbers that multiply to 40 and subtract. Okay, now remember, I'm not really gonna, and subtract to 3, okay, right? Because this is a 3, I don't care about the sign just yet. Now remember, I'm not really subtracting the numbers, I'm adding them, right? Like when I add 7 plus negative 5, that's positive 2. So I'm actually adding them. It's just right here, I'm knowing that one of them is actually going to end up being a positive and one of them is going to end up being a negative. So when I go to add them, I'm going to end up subtracting them. So the first thing I'm thinking is I need two numbers that multiply to 40 and subtract to 3. So I think like, okay, 4 and 10. No, 10 minus 4 is 6. That doesn't work. Okay, what else is 40 divisible by? Well, ends in a 0, so it's divisible by 5. Let's see. Oh, 5 and 8. 5 and 8, right? 5 times 8 is 40, and 8 minus 5 is 3. So this was my first step. Now my second step is I actually need the larger number to be negative this time, because when I add them, I want the result to be negative. So I need the larger number to be negative. Okay, now why did I want it to be positive here? Because this was positive. And here I want the larger number to be negative because this is negative. So when I add these two numbers, I want the result to be negative. So here the larger number is 8, so I want it to be negative 8 and positive 5. So here's my answer. X minus 8, x plus 5. Okay. That's it. It's your turn.